Well, I know what a gang is, but what's a glay? Oh, hello. Burns Night is upon us, a celebration of the life and work of Scottish poet Robert Burns. Now, I'm not Scottish, but I do enjoy the man's work. I enjoy scotch, and I enjoy food. Now, I've got the scotch, I've got the book, I've even got neeps and tatties, but for a proper Burns supper, you really need haggis. Now, if you're not familiar, I will now provide a detailed description of the ingredients and method of preparation for haggis.
One moment, please.
And then apparently you eat it. You know, I'm not really hungry anymore. But I can't scotch on an empty stomach. You know, I do have a recipe for vegan haggis, if you're interested. Vegan haggis? Some would say there's no such thing. Some would say it's an abomination. A greater abomination than regular haggis? It's a close call. It's full of lentils. You're not really selling me. Look, I'll make it if you want. I'll do all the work. Oh, well, in that case, sure. Tonight, we're making vegan haggis. Well, I'm the one making it.
There are many recipes for vegan haggis on internet, and they all vary somewhat, but they tend to have a few things in common. Legumes, such as lentils and sometimes beans, grains, such as steel-cut oats, pearled barley, or both, onions, and a large dose of spices, particularly black pepper. I took elements from various recipes and combined them to make something that suited both my tastes and the ingredients available in my area. Steel-cut oats are traditional, and that's what I'm using today, also known as pin oats, Irish oatmeal, and Scottish oatmeal. As their name would suggest, these oats are cut rather than rolled, resulting in a different texture. They take much longer to cook, but I prefer them for just about everything besides baking. You can certainly use rolled oats if you like, especially if that's what you already have around the house, but keep in mind that the texture will be somewhat mushier and less toothsome. You'll need some kind of legume, such as lentils. Gray-green lentils are fine and plentiful, but today I'm using red lentils. I prefer their texture, and they have a nice jolly color that gets cooked out a little bit, but you can also use red lentils to make vegan sloppy joes, so hey. I'm also going to add some kidney beans to smooth out the texture of the dish. Kidney beans have a nice creamy texture that will balance out the grittiness of the lentils. I'm also going to throw in some pearled barley. Some recipes use barley, some use oats, and some use both. This recipe uses both. You'll definitely need an onion. Onions have a flavor that is strong enough to compete with the secret parts of animals that usually go into a haggis. Mushrooms will add some body and variety to the dish. I'm using baby bella mushrooms, also known as crimini, because that's what I put in just about everything, and a few shiitakes will bring along their characteristic meatiness. A few carrots, diced up, sliced, or shredded, will add some color and sweetness. You'll need vegetable broth, or vegetable stock, depending on what's in it and what you want to call it. You can make your own, or you can use store-bought. You can also find vegan chicken broths at the store, but I think vegetable broth actually works better for this dish. If you didn't care about making this vegan and just wanted it to be vegetarian, you could use butter. I'm using olive oil since that's what I use for everything anyway, but you can use the cooking fat of your choice. I'm adding a little bit of soy sauce for depth and saltiness. A little balsamic vinegar will add some complexity with its very welcome tang and sweetness. Some recipes call for Marmite, which is made from yeast extract, but I'm all out and I didn't have time to go to a specialty shop to get more. I do, however, have this vegetable bouillon, which contains as one of its primary ingredients, autolyzed yeast extract. I'm also adding a large quantity of black pepper, since all recipes seem to agree that's one of the primary flavors of haggis, besides whatever was left over in the back of the butcher shop. Other spices I'll be using are onion powder, because why not go crazy with the onion, garlic powder, cumin, which will add a nice earthy sort of meatiness, allspice, which shows up in a lot of haggis recipes and doesn't mess around, nutmeg, which plays well with a lot of other flavors, and a little bit of cayenne pepper for some heat. You'll need at least one pot, but I recommend using two, or at least one pot and one skillet. Finally, you'll need something to bake it in, such as a loaf pan or casserole dish. Many sources, including the package it came in, recommend rinsing barley before cooking it, citing reasons such as removing dust and debris and excess starch. I'm not entirely convinced that it's necessary, but I'll do it anyway. You definitely want to sort and rinse your lentils before cooking them, though. First, pick through them for any little stones or pieces of dirt and any really weird-looking lentils, then give them a good rinse in cold water. While we're rinsing things, let's go ahead and drain and rinse those canned kidney beans. This not only gets rid of about half the sodium, it also washes away a fair amount of those raffinose sugars, which pass undigested through our upper digestive tract only to be fermented by bacteria in our lower intestine, causing flatulence. Go ahead and start the barley, since it's going to take a while and it has to be mixed in at a later stage. This is a cup of barley cooked in 2.5 cups of vegetable broth for about 40 minutes on low heat without a lid. I want to cook it until it's tender but not soft. It should still have a little bit of tooth to it. It's going to finish cooking inside the haggis. I really need to sharpen this knife, but this is still my favorite method for dicing an onion. Cutting it in half, slicing in from the side a couple of times, scoring it vertically several times, and then just slicing it from the side. All the little diced bits just fall right off the onion. You can always give them another pass on the cutting board if you want them diced finer, and you must be careful. Didn't really cut myself there, but this is the method that works for me. As for the carrots, I'm using just 2 carrots for this, a skinny one and a fat one. The skinny one, I'm just slicing all the way down. The fat one, I'm cutting in half and then slicing it. But you do you. Slice it, dice it, shred it, just make many small pieces of carrot. Now I'm putting together a little spice blend so I can have them all ready when the time comes. I'm grinding a whole lot of fresh ground black pepper, probably about a tablespoon. A weak dash of red pepper so as not to overwhelm things. I'll add more later. A teaspoon of cumin. 1/4 of a teaspoon of allspice, which is probably plenty. A dash of garlic powder and a dash of nutmeg. Now this blend is just a starting point. I will add more of some of these spices later, but it's better to start with too little of something and be able to add more than to start with too much of something, because then you're pretty much screwed. Let's not forget the apple pie incident of 2010. It's good practice to trim the ends of the mushroom stems before you use them. Some people pull them out entirely, but if the mushrooms are in good shape, I like to leave as much of the stem as I can. And of course you want to clean them first, brushing off the dirt with a soft brush or a paper towel. I'm just using 5 baby bellas and 4 shiitakes, and all I'm doing is cutting them in half one way and then slicing them the other way. But you can leave the mushroom pieces as big or as small as you like. You can just slice them, you can chop them up fine, you can even blitz them in a food processor and make them really tiny, which is something that I do sometimes when I add mushrooms to chili. It adds a nice meaty richness without having big chunks of mushrooms in there, which some people don't like. Now, in a wide bottom saucepan or large skillet over medium heat, add enough olive oil to generously coat the bottom of the pan. Then add the carrots and onions. This is 2/3 of a mirepoix, and if you wanted to add celery or bell peppers to this, I don't think that anybody would look at you askance. I mean, you're already making a vegan haggis, so go crazy. You want to saute these, stirring frequently until the carrots are just a little tender and the onions are translucent and just starting to caramelize. Add the mushrooms all at once, along with a little more oil if necessary. Cook these at least until the mushrooms start to get a little juicy. You can take them as far as browning them a little if you like. Once the mushrooms are where you want them, drizzle in 1 or 2 tablespoons of oil just to gloss up the pan, because now we're adding the spices. With the pan still over medium heat, stir well so that everything is nicely coated. Keep stirring just until a nice bouquet of fragrances wafts out of the pan. This should take no longer than 30 seconds. Have your uncooked lentils ready to dump in right away. Give them a good stir just to distribute them, then immediately pour in just enough liquid to submerge all of the ingredients. While you're stirring in the liquid, go ahead and add the vegetable bouillon or marmite if you have it. Give it a good stir, then crank it up to high just until it comes to a boil. Turn it down to low and simmer for at least 15 minutes. If you want your lentils soft rather than firm, give it at least 20 minutes. While this is simmering in an open pot, I'm going to go ahead and add a splash of soy sauce and a splash of balsamic vinegar. If you don't measure things in splashes, let's call it a scant 1/4 of a cup of soy sauce and 2 or 3 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar. Adjust according to your own tastes. Once the lentils are cooked to the desired tenderness, there should still be liquid in the pan. If there's not, say if it's bone dry, add maybe 1/2 cup of broth, because now we're adding the steel-cut oats completely dry and uncooked. These are meant not only to give the haggis a more homogeneous texture, but also to soak up any remaining liquid in the pot. This is also why we left the pearled barley slightly undercooked. Go ahead and add the barley at this point too. Stir it all together and simmer it for a good 10 minutes or until the oatmeal starts to plump up a little bit, adding scant amounts of liquid as necessary to keep it from completely drying out and scorching. As I said, the oatmeal is supposed to soak up most of the excess liquid, but it's still got to go in the oven so it can be a little juicy. This is also an excellent time to taste the haggis and adjust the spices as necessary. I added some more freshly ground black pepper, some cayenne, a tiny bit more allspice, a dash more cumin and nutmeg, and some onion powder. But you do whatever you like. Make something that tastes good to you. Now, the kidney beans are optional and I almost didn't add them, but I'm glad I did. They added some variety in color and texture, and they balanced out some of the stronger flavors of the haggis. I could have used a bigger bowl for this, but I'm just mashing them roughly, even leaving some of them whole. I added the kidney beans a little bit at a time while there was still plenty of liquid in the pot. I wasn't sure how much I would end up adding, but I ended up using the whole can. The kidney beans ended up working perfectly in concert with the oatmeal and the barley to give me exactly the texture I wanted. I ended up with a smooth, thick haggis that spread very nicely in a casserole dish. Speaking of which, that glass loaf pan turned out to be too small, so I'm using a good old-fashioned Corningware dish. Use whatever decent, oven-safe, food-safe dish you have on hand. I didn't grease the pan ahead of time and it seemed to do fine without it, but it depends on the type of pan and the amount of liquid in the haggis as it goes in. Cover the dish with a lid or tightly with foil. Place the dish in a preheated 350-degree oven and bake for 10 to 15 minutes. Then, remove the lid and bake for an additional 10 minutes or just until there's a nice sort of dry skin on the top. If a nice dry skin doesn't sound appetizing to you, you can omit this step, but just remember that this is a vegan haggis and the alternative involves something called variety meats. A traditional accompaniment to haggis, especially for a burn supper, is mashed tatties and neeps, or mashed potatoes and turnips, or potatoes and swedes, depending on who you ask and where you're from. Whatever you call them and whatever root vegetable you actually end up using, it's a lovely side dish, especially when served with a generous dollop of vegan margarine or butter. And of course, if you can and do imbibe, the meal is not complete without a dram of scotch, or the whiskey of your choice. I don't think Robert Burns would have turned up his nose at bourbon, although tonight I'm going to be having a nice single malt.
Fair far, your honest sonsy face, great chieftain of the puddin' race. Excuse me. That's all you'll get out of me without a dram of scotch. Now I know it's not filled with variety meats, but why do you think they call it awful? I'd take vegan haggis over the genuine variety any day. Scotch responsibly and tune in next time for information on something else.